OMW, on my way to you. Good at what I do, I'm OMW.
Hi everyone, it's Kim Asher here. Welcome to another exciting episode of Offshore Banter. And today we're going to talk about the fact that at some point every sailor can crack. And it's going to be a really tough episode. So I hope you're buckled in and ready for some pretty rough seas. Now, when I say everybody can crack, first of all, I mean it. I've seen it. And secondly, what does that mean? Well, it means that if you put somebody on a ship for long enough, at some point, they will diverge from normality. Now, what is normality, right? I remember there used to be somebody in my life that would tell me all the time, oh, you know, that's not normal, you need to be normal, right? So I don't mean that. There was actually a book I saw many years ago that was called On Being Normal and Other Dysfunctional Behavior, right? There is no normal, but there's certainly a viable connection with reality, let's put it that way. And at some point, if you put somebody on a ship long enough, they will diverge from normality, from a connection to reality, from what they would consider to be their normality, right? Things change. And for some people, it can be as short as a day on a ship, the first time they get on it. And for other people, it might take them decades of being on a ship. It might take one particularly bad trip. It might be bad news from home. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about why this needs to be an important discussion in the industry. And we're going to talk about some of the fantastic people and groups that are trying to do something about it. And we're going to talk about the different ways that people can crack and the things that can happen that make it so much of an important topic for all people that work at sea. So, content warning is going to get rough. And but if you have the strength to tolerate some rough seas, I urge you to get ready for it and to stay with this, because if anything about this sector has anything to do with your life, you need to hear about this. We're going to start by basically sailing out of this safe harbour right here, right now, right into the belly of a Force 12. It's going to get that dark that quickly. Because it needs to. Because you need to know that this is a major issue. So about 10 years ago, I was working with a guy who was a deck foreman, and he was a wonderful guy. Really good shipmate, great at his job, fantastic attitude, but he carried an air of sadness around him. And I worked with him on and off over about a year, maybe for about 6 months of actual, time on the same ship. And during that period, I heard the backstory as to why he had this air of sadness around him. And of course, I'm never going to name anyone, or in some instances, particularly like this, I will be changing some details to make sure you do not know who, where, how, when. But I can tell you this is what happened. To some extent, as much as I can tell you without, putting him or his family at risk of exposure in a public space. He had been an ADF before I met him, assistant deck foreman, and he had got a job for his son, working as a rigger, and he took his son out for his first trip offshore. And he thought, I bring my son onto the team. I can help him learn the ropes, show him how the industry is, make sure he has a good start, and get him comfortable in this environment. And the ship left port, and immediately apparent this kid was not suited to be on a ship. He immediately fractured from reality, could not cope with being in a steel box, and they were in a storm, a rough storm, hard, a big construction vessel that was heaving and pitching and rolling all over the place. This kid's first introduction to life at sea was tough on that level, and he wasn't suited for it either. About a day after they left port that night, his father was worried about him. His father was definitely worried about him. And he was hoping that, after a couple of days he'd settle down or whatever. But in the middle of I think it was the second night that they'd been out of port, the storm was raging. And the back deck had been blocked off with a barrier. There were a couple of guys on duty there on the deck, middle of the night, and they were inside the barrier, of course, and they were taking shelter, and they're sitting down, drinking coffee, on watch, but on standby, really, not doing anything, just keeping an eye out for any emergencies during the storm. And they see this new recruit, this kid, with his hold all packed with his personal effects. On the other side, they were on the port side. This was the starboard entrance onto the back deck, and this kid stepped over the barrier. The back deck is pitch black. It's awash. It's like underwater half the time. There's massive waves coming from both sides. They're really choppy, big seas, very wet deck. This kid steps over the barrier with a hold all, with his personal effects, and sliding all over the place, falling over, getting submerged in this freezing, icy, oceanic storm. One of the guys on watch realizes that this kid has lost it and tries to go after him. It's too late. The kid gets to the stern of the vessel and steps over the final railing there with his bag, steps off into the sea. At night, in this storm. And of course his body was never found. There's another guy who wasn't a new guy offshore. He had been working on a ship for most of his career, over 10 years, and he was on my team. And there was something a bit odd about him. He wasn't fully integrated into the team. Did his work very well. Really done a lot of time offshore, and people around me had worked with him on and off for years. And I had a chat with one of them. I said, why, I call him Johnny. Why is Johnny, just a little bit disconnected from things? Is there anything wrong with him? Does he need any support? And the guy said, no, but let me tell you why Johnny's a bit disconnected from things. I was working with Johnny 3 or 4 years ago, and we'd been working together for years. He's a great guy, great sense of humour, great at his job, just a really good guy to work with. And then 3 or 4 years ago, he got a message saying his mother had died. We were offshore. He didn't have a father. His father left when he was a kid. So his mother was his only parent. He had no brothers or sisters. Effectively, his mother was his only family. and she had died unexpectedly in an accident. And he told the offshore manager, he told the captain, he emailed the office, and they basically said, well, you can get off next port call. By which time, given the fact that he was pretty much the only living relative, the local authorities would have already made a bunch of decisions as to what happened with his mother's body and other things as well, not to mention the psychological trauma of losing your entire family effectively, unexpectedly. And he pretty much demanded to get off, right there and then. And no one listened to him. No one really gave a crap what happened. Like, you know, I was just another offshore guy with an emergency. Yeah, we'll get him off at the next port call in about 10 days or whatever. So he pushed it as hard as he could, stamped his feet, threatened, cried, really demanded it. The next day, everyone knew that he'd been making a nuisance of himself. And the next day he didn't turn up for his watch, his shift. But his line manager was like, let's just give Johnny a bit of space, eh? We'll cover a shift for him. Maybe he'll be alright tomorrow. They didn't even send anybody to look for him. They're just like, Johnny's having a bad time. He's probably in his cabin. We'll leave him to it. Then they went through that shift, 12 hours, overnight, and then the next day, second shift, still no Johnny. So they started looking for Johnny. And Johnny, they found him. He was alive, of course, because he was, several years later on my team for a bit. He was on the helipad with his bags packed and had sat there for almost 48 hours, not going for meals, not going to sleep, not working. I'm going home. I'm waiting for a helicopter. I'm not leaving this helipad until a helicopter is here to take me home so I can bury my mother. And at that point, they knew they had to get Johnny off. At that point, they took it seriously. But that 48-hour period, something inside Johnny changed. And he was no longer the same as he used to be. And the trauma of that event had manifested into a change in his personal characteristics. Well, there are so many other stories I could tell you. Right, those are just some of the stories of people that crack. Veterans that crack. People who are out and out sea mammals that don't even live on land much every year. Proper offshore guys, proper sailors, seafarers. And not just new recruits. We're talking people who've spent most of their working lives at sea, who can crack. All they need is the wrong ship at the wrong time, the wrong project, the wrong place, bad news from home, a bad line manager, whatever it is. There's some combination of factors that mean any seafarer can crack. It's not just people that crack because of things that happen or who they are. It's also what some seafarers can do to other seafarers. The story of Midshipman X. And I shared a bit of my own personal story an episode or two ago about being, pretty much the first transgender woman in the world in my part of this 98% male industry, offshore construction, offshore wind farm construction. Didn't share that I found myself alone with a guy twice my size threatening to kill me unless he could have his way with me. Or the physical assaults when I first came out, pushed downstairs, pushed out of elevators, punched, slapped, the verbal attacks against me, all of that stuff, right? There's bullying, there's harassment, and it's not just me, right? I'm just one of thousands of examples of people that have found themselves on the butt end of being treated badly. And quite often, women working offshore don't report incidents. I certainly didn't report 99% of what happened to me, only when it got really serious. Why? Because first of all, if you report an incident, you label yourself a victim, and in the retelling of the event, you have to relive the trauma, and it makes it indelible. It makes it worse. And then everyone knows about it, and you feel even more isolated. And then quite often, and I've seen it happen, you'll get companies that say, well, of course, it's really difficult to accommodate a woman on a ship because, might impact other crew members and how they behave. Or if she's somebody that's had something happen to her, well, we don't want that happening again. It's safer to keep her on land, isn't it? And it doesn't just happen to women, of course. And it's not just about the sexual assault, sexual abuse. When banter goes too far, when harassment manifests instead of banter, banter's okay, but it should always come from a place of mutual respect. But it doesn't always. And when it crosses that line, it becomes bullying, harassment, it creates trauma, it impacts people, it's negative. There are so many sources of potential trauma-inducing events, not to mention a need for monitoring mental health in such a harsh environment anyway. Let's say an anchor line snaps, whips back, cuts a guy in half, and his crewmates are there trying to piece him back together while the life is ebbing out from him. What trauma are they going to go through? What about their mental health? There was a guy who was sliced in half by an A-frame that lost its hydraulics, and it slammed down while a guy was working on it, and it literally cut him in half. And the company, that I will not name, cleaned up his body and the blood and stored it before they even told the client representatives on board that there had been a fatal accident. What about the mental health of the people that had to do that, and the pressure they felt at having to hide the death, or people that saw it happen, or even the people that had to hide it on an administrative level, try and sweep it under the carpet? Did they feel nothing? Was there no trauma there? Can they live with themselves? Can they look in the mirror? This industry It's an industry that is built on diverse groups of people being put into a steel container that's tossed around, divorced from the mainstream reality of land, put into doing high-risk operations. And sometimes things go wrong, sometimes teams are not put together properly. And the impact of that can have really big mental health consequences. Safety is always stated as being put first, and in most instances it is. Like, there's not a single operation that happens offshore that isn't or shouldn't have been risk assessed. And that's critical, and it's been really important and powerful since the days of major disasters in the oil industry decades ago, the Piper Alpha, etc. There's been a massive improvement. Everything from doing heavy lifts, working at height, confined spaces, all of it. And we all have to get our offshore certificates, right? Firefighting, sea survival, working at height, first aid, and the GWO fantastic manual handling course. Picking up a 1 kilo bag of sugar and putting it 5 meters away. Yeah, right. That's great training. All that kind of stuff. Safety is important. It gets people home safely. But mental health has been almost completely ignored. So, clearly I could talk about this stuff for a long time. I could give you story after story after story. Some of them really dark. But the bottom line is, at any point, any seafarer needs or might need mental health support. There should be a way of helping with that. So the first thing I'm going to mention is saferwaves.org. I'll put a link below. saferwaves.org. Any seafarer can reach out to them at any time to talk about anything from sexual assault, abuse, trauma, personal problems, being stuck on a ship because of ship owner abandonment, anything, whatever it is. You need somebody to listen to you. Saferwaves.org is there. Voluntary organisation, not particularly well funded, but with a small team of very committed people that are doing incredibly important work. Then you've got the Centre for Ocean Policy and Economics, and my friend Eva, and I was asked to be on a panel for that about a year ago. And because of my own personal trauma and things I had to deal with in my own personal life, I haven't been that actively engaged in it, but I've kept a view on what they're doing. And I'm proud to have been asked, and I wish I could have spent a bit more time focusing on it. But the people drawn from all around the world and being listened to at IMO level. So basically, the UN is listening to what this fantastic group of people are doing. And they're looking at improving mental health for seafarers by trying to get it incorporated into STCW training, even a little bit at a basic level, any type of awareness of it, anything to move this industry forwards with it is a good thing to do. Because you know what? If you stack up on the one side the microcosm of being on a ship and the trauma of things that can happen there and the risk and the activities, the complexity of the work, and the powder keg of what it's like sometimes being on a ship against the amount of mental health support for people who are in that environment, it doesn't balance, does it? For LGBT plus people in the offshore industry, it's a minefield as to whether we can even work out there because of how quite often we're treated. For women in general, it's a minefield as to how we can work out there and what we have to face and hide to keep a career. And it's not just the marginal groups, the vulnerable people, the biggest, toughest, most alpha male seafarer can crack in a heartbeat in the right situation with the right news, or just being stuck on a ship at the wrong time for too long. I don't care how big you are, how tough you are, you will crack. Everyone can crack. And so, my own personal life, Gordon Foote, who is a legend in the offshore industry at this point, been everywhere. I think everyone knows Gordon, certainly in offshore construction. Almost everyone I know has come across Gordon at some point. Gordon's a very good friend of mine. And about 8 years ago, when I was facing the crisis of realizing that I had to transition, and I had to try and do it in an industry that was 98% male and really was not very accepting of anything that wasn't like them. I was on a ship in Nigeria, on the bridge wing, on a bright sunny day, middle of the day, at the end of my shift, literally deciding whether to jump into the sea or to deal with the fact that I needed to transition and knew or had some idea of the personal cost it would impact me with. Well, Gordon saw I was not having a good time and came out and said hello, had a chat with me. I didn't tell him specifically what was wrong, but he stopped that happening. He genuinely stopped that happening. And I am here today because of Gordon. And I'm really happy that I'm here today because of Gordon. I'm happy that I found the strength to go through that and survive what I knew would be terrible and was worse than I even imagined. But here I am on the other side of it. And I'm happy about that. I love who I am. And I love the fact I've broken through that glass ceiling. And I'm able to stand here or sit here and tell this story, and to some extent, even with a bad hair day, like my hair is terrible. Well, Gordon's now doing something stupid. He is for safer waves, walking up Kilimanjaro, sponsored walk. Thank God, Gordon, you're a glutton for punishment. But if you care about the well-being of sailors and the maritime industry, and you want this industry to thrive in this century and progress into the future, and to look after the people that go out there and do the essential work that keep international trade flowing with the transportation of goods and services, you want oil and gas, or you want renewable energy, or you want anything to happen that is required to occur offshore, then you should give a damn about sailors and you should get involved with it. And I know that there's going to be 100 different people saying to you today, save the donkeys, or whatever else, right? Get involved with this one. Because if you're watching this and you're still here, however many minutes in right now, then it means that you have an interest in the offshore sector, in the maritime industry. And that means you should give a damn about sailors, mariners, people that work on ships. And you should recognize the fact that the vast majority of them have almost zero support structure for their mental health, whether at sea or on land. And anything that is there is underserviced, underfunded, threadbare, and a tick box exercise, or the seeds of something that is struggling to survive. So the Centre for Ocean Policy and Economics, Safer Waves, and Gordon Foote are the three things, the three people, the three groups that I'm going to link below. And I'm saying, share it, get involved, do something to make sure, if you're the person that needs that support, if you're the person that cracks, or somebody you love cracks, maybe there's a way for them to get back mentally and physically from where they ended up when things went bad for them. Okay, people, so now, again, maybe you'll understand why I end every single episode of this show by saying, if you're on watch, if you're offshore right now, if you're working at sea and far away from home, have a good watch. Be a good shipmate and look after each other out there. Make sure everyone gets home safely. And this is me, Kim Asher, sending you all a big hug, lots of love. Goodbye, and see you next time, when I will resume with the much promised story of dirty stories from the past. Bye.